In the 3 years I'd been with him, we'd never once fought. He barely seemed to feel anything at all. Whatever I said, whatever I did, he let me have my way and told me I was right. Richard and my friends all praised my good taste. They said emotionally steady men were rare these days and urged me to hang on to him. I told myself he was simply built that way, reserved, undemonstrative. So whenever the fleeting thought surfaced, does he even love me? I brushed it aside. Then a freak slip and fall sent me to the emergency room, and I happened to see him shouting at another woman, "You promised you'd take care of yourself. Do you even know what your body is going through? He's that wonderful? You'd risk your life to give him a child." The last thing I saw before the door swung shut was he crushing her against his chest, tears streaming down his profile. While setting my wrist, the doctor said I was the most pain-tolerant young woman he'd ever met. Instinctively I tried to answer with a smile, but the moment I parted my lips they split, dry, chapped skin tearing in 3 places. The sting jerked me back to our first kiss, when I'd misjudged the angle and nicked his mouth. In that memory Blake gently folded my flustered self into his arms. The same man, yet not the same, because the tenderness he'd shown that other woman 30 minutes ago was raw, unfiltered. I glanced at the swelling in my wrist and burst into tears. "Hey, kiddo," the doctor teased, "I just praised you. How'd you flip the switch so fast?" I opened my mouth, but all that came out was, "I'm slow on the uptake, only now starting to hurt." The fracture ached, yet beside the weight in my chest the pain barely registered. I cried because I remembered the time another man had confessed to me and Blake hadn't batted an eye. When I asked whether he was jealous he'd laughed. "Just proves you're irresistible." Why should I be jealous? I also remembered the month I'd spent overseas 6 months earlier. Between the workload and the time difference, he and I had exchanged a handful of texts and never once spoke on the phone. Under the same circumstances, a colleague and her boyfriend had fought and made up repeatedly. The brief separation only fused them tighter. Later I asked Blake why he didn't call to check up on me like other boyfriends did. Without missing a beat he replied, "You were swamped. I didn't want to intrude on what little rest you had, and I trusted you." Trust, or indifference? The question that had nagged me for months felt answered today. When Richard arrived I was staring out the window. Seeing me alone in the hospital bed, Mom asked, puzzled, "Where's Blake?" "His office isn't far, how could we beat him here?" My voice came out hoarse. "I didn't tell him." Mom nodded as if that made perfect sense. "Right. Victoria says he's been working overtime on your wedding ceremony and honeymoon. Better not distract him." I almost said he might already be somewhere in this building, but the words jammed in my throat. How could I tell Richard that the future they boasted about to every acquaintance had probably never loved me at all? That his legendary composure might be nothing more than selective feeling? He could rage, he could ache. Only I wasn't the one who stirred it. When I stayed quiet, Mom assumed the fracture was bothering me and hurried off to badger the doctor. Once the room held only Dad and me, he asked softly, "Lila, did you and Blake fight?" Though Dad spoke little, he noticed far more than Mom. He said someone with my temper might forget to phone Blake right after an accident, but once I was settled in the hospital I'd definitely call. Looking into his worried, tender eyes, I blubbered like a child, "Dad, I don't want to marry Blake anymore." Before I could explain, Mom followed the doctor back in. Seeing me hiccuping with sobs, the doctor chuckled after examining the break. "Nothing major, discomfort is normal." I stopped listening, because just then I saw Blake walk past the doorway supporting a woman. Mom loves to post on social media, so minutes after we arrived, Victoria appeared. Noticing his absence, she asked, "Where's Blake?" Mom rattled off, "Lila didn't want to disturb him, hasn't told him yet." Victoria's face darkened. "Work can wait, Lila comes first. I'll call him right now." She has zero tolerance for delay. Before the sentence ended her phone was ringing. He must have been occupied. The call almost timed out before he answered. Victoria always uses speakerphone, so we all heard the female voice. "Hi, Mrs. Shaw." He stepped out without his phone. "May I help you?" Everyone except me reacted. Mom slid to the bedside, perplexed, eyes fixed on Victoria's phone. Dad glanced at me, then at Victoria, his expression hardening. Victoria herself seemed to forget the speaker was on. She asked in disbelief, "Sophie? Is that Sophie?" A pause, then a warmer tone, "It's me. I didn't think you'd still recognize my voice, Mrs. Shaw." Sophie. I'd seen the name in his study. When I asked who she was and why he kept a postcard from her, he tossed it into the trash in front of me, and said flatly, "Just someone I no longer keep in touch with." If she was no one special, why did Victoria know her voice so well? If she was no one special, why had Blake lost control the moment he saw her? Victoria snapped out of it and cut the call. With a forced smile she said, "Lila, don't misunderstand. They were probably discussing work." I hesitated, then decided to lay it out. "She's his ex-girlfriend, isn't she? I just saw them together." I recounted everything I'd witnessed. "Aunt Victoria," I added, perfectly calm, "call off the wedding ceremony before the invitations go out." Victoria refused outright. "There must be some misunderstanding. I won't deny Sophie and he had a history, but it's ancient. Don't act in haste, I'll have Blake explain everything to you right now." Before she finished, her phone rang again. Her face said it was Blake. Sure enough, the instant she picked up she barked, "Blake, whatever you're doing, get to the orthopedic ward this second." Minutes after she hung up, he pushed through the door. He greeted Richard and Mom. When no one answered, he lowered his eyes and came to my bedside. "Why didn't you call me the moment it happened?" I studied his face, the same one I'd looked at for 3 years. His expression was calm. It gave nothing away. When I didn't answer, Victoria snapped, "Why were you with Sophie? Explain yourself, in front of Lila and Lila." Dad spoke before he could. "Mrs. Shaw, until the kids actually sign the license, Eleanor and I are simply Lila's parents. Don't pressure Blake, our family doesn't start calling people in-laws before the ink is dry." A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He pressed his lips together, then said to me first, "I'm sorry. I ran into Sophie while I was here with a colleague. I let the line blur and I hurt you." Northbridge had been buried under snow for days. Half the city had landed in the ER with slip and falls. I never thought the careful one, me, would join the fracture statistics. And I definitely never thought the fall would crack open the real Blake. The wrist block was wearing off. Between pulses of pain I said quietly, "You never stopped loving her, did you? That's why you stay so calm around me, you know exactly who your heart belongs to, so nothing I do can shake you." "That's not true," he cut in, sudden and sharp. For a second I wondered if I was dreaming, if any of this was real. "I care about you. I think this is the first time I've seen you show emotion." We spoke at once. The moment his words registered, I laughed. Maybe realizing we needed to finish this ourselves, Richard and Victoria slipped out. He took the chair Mom had just left. He reached for my hand, then stopped. One was a mummy of bandages, the other mapped with scrapes and bruises. How did it get this bad? The way he hovered, afraid to touch, tightened my throat, tears almost crested. "Blake, if I'd known your heart was taken, I would never have chased you. I've always been drawn to excellence. Quick-minded, top of every class, few men ever caught my eye. He was the first I actually fell for. Before him I used to joke with Richard that I'd die alone. I couldn't stomach patronizing men, or undisciplined ones, or anyone who couldn't keep up. Once I knew I liked him, I asked around. 1 5-year relationship, already 2 years in the rearview when we met. According to his friends, the breakup with his ex-girlfriend had been brutal, left him wary of dating. I'd just graduated college the year I fell for him. While launching my studio, I finagled mentorship lunches to stay near him. His buddies warned plenty had tried, none lasted. His emotions flatlined so hard you couldn't tell delight from anger, guessing wore women out. I kept going, terrified I'd never feel this spark again, and chased him for over a year. He finally said yes on his birthday. Knowing he hated the cold, I hand-knit him a sweater and imported the limited edition action figure of his favorite movie hero. I still don't know if he caved to persistence or simply surrendered. Either way, I bagged Northbridge's untouchable tech prince, and was about to marry him. I doubted his love plenty, then reminded myself this was simply Blake, steady, unruffled, exactly what I'd wanted. Turns out that calm was just indifference. "I'm sorry, Lila. Sophie's married with a child, we're history. I failed to make you feel safe, but I do love you." His earnestness almost swayed me. Then a knock sounded. Sophie stood in the doorway in a hospital gown, uninvited. When no one answered, she walked in, pallid, lips the scary purple that signals a bad heart. Didn't mean to intrude, but his phone kept ringing, could be urgent. As she finished, the phone chirped again. He glanced at me. "Business call, be right back." The moment he left, Sophie settled into his chair like we were old friends. "So you're the 5 years younger fiancé everyone's talking about. First meeting's a little grim, huh?" The image of Blake hugging her froze my tongue. I kept silent. She laughed. "Relax, kid. I'm dying. I'm not here to steal him." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. A beat later I said, Blake told me you're married. Over. That cracked her up, laughter turned to wheezing as she clutched her chest. Sweetie, people cheat even when they're married. I divorced last year, Blake just doesn't know. I had no reply. Recovering, she gave me a long look. I envy you. If I still had a healthy body, back then. Before she could finish, Blake returned. Seeing us chatting, he shot me an anxious glance. Sophie, doctor said stay in your room. Go. She obliged, pausing at the door. Little sister, wish you both happiness. Once she left, he asked what she'd said and warned she loved to provoke, so ignore anything upsetting. Without thinking I answered, she divorced last year. His shoulders slackened for a beat. Oh. Her choice. I stayed 3 more nights in the hospital, never saw Sophie again. He moved his office to my room, stationed beside me day and night. We never revisited that conversation, but the crack inside me only widened. The second day of recuperation at home, a friend texted photos. Lila, I was visiting someone and saw Mr. Shaw feeding a woman. Do you know her? Every frame showed Blake alive in a way I'd rarely seen, laughing eyes, hands steady as he lifted the spoon. Sophie said she envied me. God, how I envied her. My head was a mess. By the time I came back to myself, I was standing inside the penthouse loft. I had watched the raw shell turn, inch by inch, into the home I'd pictured. I had fantasized 1,000 times about the everyday life Blake and I would share here, but right now, I felt zero joy about marrying the man I thought I loved. I rooted through the unopened delivery boxes in the foyer until I found a baseball bat. Then I swung it as hard as I could into the dining table. When the blow barely left a dent, I went to the utility closet and fetched a hammer. For the rest of the afternoon, I smashed every single room in the loft with my one good hand. Blood kept seeping from the gash on the back of my hand, and I didn't care in the least. He walked in to find me slumped on the floor, exhausted. After his gaze swept across the ruins, the only emotion on his face was mild surprise, nothing more. I couldn't help asking, aren't you angry? He crouched in front of me, and gently tucked a tangled strand of hair behind my ear. Smash away. You said you hated a lot of the finishes. Now we get a do-over. A moment of silence, then I laughed. While I laughed, tears rolled down my cheeks. Blake, let's stop here. I'm not marrying you. His hand was still in my hair. At my words, he paused, but only for a second. Then, as if he hadn't heard, he kept smoothing my hair. If we redo the loft, we'll miss the wedding date. I've got another place sitting empty, we'll stay there until this one's finished. If wrecking the apartment hadn't drained every ounce of my energy, I would have slapped him across the face. He rattled on forever about seating charts and flower arrangements. I picked up my phone from the coffee table, opened the photos a friend had sent, and thrust the screen at him. That finally shut him up. After who knows how long he spoke again. Sophie's sick. She doesn't have family or friends. I just go to check on her. I nodded, calm. Whether it's mercy or something else, I understand why you visit. His head snapped up. Shock flickered in his eyes, plus relief he couldn't hide. But you shouldn't have lied to me. The friend who sent the pictures works in entertainment. She'd snapped Blake spoon-feeding Sophie, then dug around for me, mapping out when and how often they met each day. During my hospitalization, I'd thought he was glued to my bedside, but he'd slipped out, citing calls with partners, video meetings, talking to the doctor, and rushed to Sophie. Tending 2 patients at once, aren't you exhausted? He opened his mouth, nothing came out but sorry. When strength crept back into my legs, I stood. I sidestepped the hand he stretched toward me. If Sophie weren't dying, this wouldn't end so easily. I'll tell Richard the real reason the wedding's off. As for your family, you handle them. I turned and left. Whatever look he wore, I didn't stay to see. I went to Richard and told them everything. Mom burst into tears, cursing Blake between sobs. Dad sighed, eyes red. Lila, we respect your call. Maybe it's our fault, thought our extra decades would let us read people. We were blind. Once Mom calmed, she said she'd demand compensation from Victoria. The loft itself had been paid for by his family, but every stick of furniture and every tile had come from ours. When Dad learned I'd trashed the place, he didn't scold me. Mom even praised it. Every inch of that design was your heart. No way we leave it for him and some other woman. Their backing diffused most of my rage. That night I posted a new status. Wedding cancelled. Strangers from here on. My previous update had been my birthday party, the day Blake proposed. He hates photos. But that night he humored me and we took dozens. I'd centered the grid on the one where his smile shone brightest. How happy I'd looked then only sharpened how ridiculous I felt now. Question marks flooded the comment thread. Private messages pinged. Weren't you getting married? What happened? I answered none of them. When I kept rejecting calls, Victoria marched over the next morning. The instant she stepped in, she seized my hands. Lila, Blake screwed up. I'll make him apologize, buy you anything, whatever it takes. You two have been together years. How can you split over something so small? I had her checked. Sophie doesn't have long, she'll never stand between you. Honestly, part of my fondness for he had come from her. From day one Victoria had showered me with praise and gifts, like Richard bragging about him. She bragged to everyone about her perfect daughter-in-law. My friends griped about monster-in-laws. And each time I'd think, at least Victoria and I will never sink that low. I used to believe her affection meant our families were equals, or that my own success earned it, plus we clicked. Truth was, every warm gesture hinged on the sick girl who still held her son's heart. Auntie, I can't beat a ghost, let alone a living one. I won't wait for the day Blake can't be bothered to speak to me yet stares at Sophie's things, lost in memories. Good men are rare these days. I'd thought I'd struck gold. Guessing his thoughts tired me, but I'd accepted the labor, happily. Only after meeting Sophie did I realize, after her, every other woman was interchangeable. He loves Sophie, only her. Only in front of Sophie does he feel, laugh, rage, turn human. I don't know how deep their past went, or why they ever parted, but since reuniting they radiated longing too thick to cut. My feelings about Sophie are messy. I envy the way Blake carries her in his heart, yet I pity a girl fading before 30. The dying deserve extra compassion, so I won't fight, won't compete. Victoria choked on her sobs. What does he see in that girl? A death sentence on file, and she still lures him. When Blake insisted on marrying her back then, I blocked it. They broke up for reasons I never grasped. I thought he'd come to his senses, instead he turned to ice. Blake used to laugh all the time. She broke down. I stared at her claw-like grip on my hands, face blank. When her tears ebbed, she noticed my chill. Feeling her slacken, I yanked free. Lila, you. I met her gaze, voice flat. You're a woman. Could you bear your husband forever loving someone else? Victoria had no answer. Auntie, no matter how much I love Blake, I love myself more. Now that I know the truth, I won't let myself be wronged. Disaster in love, triumph in work. For some reason I couldn't explain, several companies that once considered our studio too small now reached out with olive branches. I was still on medical leave, but to meet the new deadlines I threw myself right back into the job. During this stretch, Richard told me Blake kept coming to the house looking for me. Even after my parents said things that were downright ugly, he would show up the next day without fail, just for the chance to see me. My assistants at the studio said the same. Blake dropped by constantly, asking where I was. Mutual friends kept singing his praises, but once I told them exactly why we'd split, most of them backed off for good. A few busybodies still insisted I was cruel and unreasonable and that I owed Blake an explanation. Reading that nonsense, I couldn't be bothered to argue. I deleted and blocked them the same way I deleted him. I was recuperating at Hawthorne, the mountain lodge owned by Dad's old friend. The place was serene, clear streams, quiet trails, crisp air, and it dulled the ache of the breakup better than any pill. One morning, right after I'd washed up, I saw a man sitting in the courtyard. When he turned at the sound of my footsteps, I blinked in disbelief. Chase? What are you doing here? Chase was the owner's son. We'd grown up together. We should have been the kind of childhood confidants who told each other everything, but sometime in middle school he decided my life was his favorite sport. Whatever I liked, he pretended to hate. Whatever I couldn't stand, he made sure appeared in mine. After Morgan, I'd stayed in-state for college. Chase's grades weren't quite good enough, so his mom shipped him abroad to gild his transcript. I remembered he'd flown home right after graduation to take over the family business, yet 2 months later he'd bolted again, claiming he needed more school. Looking back, all that juvenile sparring felt ridiculous. Seeing him now, I was honestly delighted. I came for you, he said. Years had passed, and Chase looked steadier, calmer. His voice had dropped into a rich baritone that made me grin. Talk more. That timbre should be doing voiceover work. I waited, but he stayed silent. When I finally glanced up, his cheeks were flushed and the tips of his ears were scarlet. What's wrong? He drew a fast, shaky breath. Lila, I like you. Huh? I stared, wondering if I'd misheard. He slowed down this time. I've liked you since middle school. Back then I was clueless, I just wanted your attention, so I annoyed you every chance I got. In high school I planned to confess, but I overheard you describing the guy you wanted. My grades were terrible, so I buckled down, but it was too little too late, I couldn't follow you to the same university. My first years overseas, I battled language barriers while begging friends back home to spy for me. When they reported you were single and scorning every suitor, I was thrilled and terrified, thrilled you were free, terrified you'd reject me too. After college I finally felt good enough to approach you, so I came home. Before I could say anything, rumor said you'd fallen for someone else. I dug into his background, he really was better than me then, so I left again. Lila, I've never stopped loving you. When I heard you'd broken up, I came straight back. I know I'm a coward who keeps drifting farther, but I need you to know how I feel. A suitcase stood beside him, he'd come straight from the airport. The purple smudges under his eyes proved he'd flown 14 hours without sleep. You're about to collapse. Go nap first, we'll talk later. Maybe because I didn't gush a reply, the light in his eyes dimmed. I rubbed my nose, embarrassed. I'm not turning you down, I just crawled out of one relationship and I'm not ready to tumble into another. He exhaled in relief. As long as it's not an outright no. I was afraid every stupid thing I did as a kid made me unreliable. That worry was unnecessary. Though we'd rarely spoken these years, Richard kept me posted on the Hawthorns, and old classmates who'd gone abroad with Chase filled in the rest. The loud, hot-headed boy who'd yell at anyone had vanished in college. Because his grades had been weak, he'd stayed silent the entire first year. Once his English caught up, he dove into campus life and soon became the big man on campus. Plenty of foreign girls claimed they'd never date a Chinese guy, yet Chase was perpetually surrounded by admirers. Thinking of that, I chuckled. Go sleep, your eyes are so red they're about to bleed. So Chase moved into the lodge as well. He told me he'd already graduated and, with a friend, had launched a small company overseas. Business was solid. His father had urged him to come home for ages, but he'd lacked a reason, until now. Week 2 of my recuperation, an international academic group checked in. According to the manager, they were geologists studying local formations. All young, all energetic, Chase and I volunteered as guides. On their last afternoon, one of the boys declared his feelings for me in front of everyone. I watched Chase's face darken, and after I politely declined, he saw the guy off with a sarcastic smile sharp enough to shave with. Back in the courtyard he marched straight to me, fuming. Lila, those foreigners fall for anything that moves, keep your distance next time. Before Blake, romance had been a locked room to me. While dating him I'd sensed something off, but without experience, I'd shoved every doubt into a corner. Watching Chase frantically steer me away from the foreign student, I suddenly asked, if we ever got together and someone confessed to me in front of you, what would you do? He exploded. Who dares? I busted my butt for years just to stand beside you. Any idiot tries to poach my girl and I'll bury him. I pressed further. When you really love someone, don't you get possessive? You want to know where they are, what they're doing, and you can't stand seeing them close to anyone else? Puzzled by the question, he still answered honestly. Of course. Love is exclusive. If it were me, I'd glue myself to your side 24/7. The day they sawed off my cast, Chase drove me to Northbridge General. When the tech finished, I hesitated for a second. Still, I decided to swing by cardiology. Using the photo a friend had snapped, I found the ward where Sophie had been. I never expected the bed to be occupied by someone else. I stepped to the nurse's station and asked about Sophie. The doctors felt she no longer needed inpatient care, so she was discharged last month. Knowing I didn't want to hear anything about him, Richard and the studio crew had kept his name out of conversation for weeks. Counting backward, the silence had started around the same day Sophie left the hospital. During the days Chase stayed at Hawthorne with me, he finally learned the whole story of Blake and me. Half the time he cursed himself for rushing back overseas before digging into his past. The other half he ached for me, furious that I'd been deceived for years. Maybe he read my mind, because as we left the campus he said quietly, Lila, whether that woman is still around or not has nothing to do with you. You did nothing wrong, he did. Of course I knew I wasn't at fault, but for some reason, whenever I pictured the woman he had yearned for all these years with only days left to live, a hollow sadness crept in. Chase dropped me off and, at Richard's insistence, stayed for dinner before heading back to his parents' place. Since he'd spent every night but one at the lodge with me, both sets of parents had clearly caught on. Yet no one asked if I'd agreed to date Chase, so I stayed happily mum. I assumed I'd never run into Blake or Sophie again. The day after I returned to the city, I spotted them on my commute home. I was idling at a red light when I glanced up and saw Blake pushing a wheelchair along the crosswalk. One look at him and I shifted my gaze to the figure in the chair. Compared with a few months earlier, Sophie looked gaunt, yet her face wore an ease I'd never seen. I studied Blake. He'd lost weight, though a smile played on his lips. His eyes stayed locked on Sophie, as if the slightest lapse might make her vanish. The light turned green. Before I pulled away, Blake glanced over and our eyes met. In that instant his widened. He started toward me, then checked himself when Sophie spoke and stayed at her side. I brushed off the encounter. A week later, he was leaning against my front gate when I stepped out of my car. Straightening, he rasped, "She's gone." "The same day we saw you." I took a beat, then said flatly, "So?" "I barely knew her, you don't need to deliver the news." When he stayed silent, I let myself in. Just as I was shutting the door, he pressed his palm against the frame. "Lila, we need to talk." I couldn't imagine what was left to say, but I had vanished without a trace, so I motioned him inside. Once he sat, I fetched a bottle of ice-cold water and set it in front of him. A bitter smile flickered across his face. Still, he cracked the cap and drank. Early in his startup days, his erratic meals and constant booze had left him with severe chronic stomach ulcers. All the years we were together, I never touched chilled drinks in front of him, and concocted every stomach-soothing broth I could find. Victoria once sang my praises to Richard because Blake hadn't had a flare-up in ages. Now I no longer cared whether the ice water stabbed at his gut. "I never planned to see Sophie again," he said. "I wanted to marry you, to build a life with you." I believed him. Apart from the emotional lockbox he kept around me, he'd treated me well, and someone as calculating as Blake wouldn't propose unless he'd mapped out forever. "Before I saw how you look at the person you love, I could live with your composure. Once I saw the difference, I couldn't unsee it." His eyes reddened instantly. After a pause he whispered, "If I swear I'll change, would you give me another chance?" "No." The answer left my mouth clean and sharp. "I won't compete with a ghost, and I don't believe you can erase Sophie, or your past." He said nothing. "The recent commissions flooding the studio, those came from you, didn't they?" He gave a soft nod. "I'll take them as your apology. After this, let's not meet again. Every glimpse of you reminds me how stupid I used to be." He opened his mouth, then swallowed whatever words were left. Clutching his stomach, he walked out. Once the door shut, I tossed the half-empty bottle, and my last wisp of feeling for him, into the trash. Later, mutual friends passed along news. Against his family's wishes, Blake left the country. His father landed in the ICU from the shock. After discharge, Mr. Shaw handed the Shaw estate to a professional manager. His own company, rumor had it, was now run by the co-founder who'd started it with him. Thanks to a string of solid projects, my little studio had climbed to the top of corporate must-hire lists. I worked until sleep felt optional, and celebrated every extra dollar I earned with my own sweat. Chase had fully taken over the Hawthorne chain. Logically he should be busier than I am, yet he always carved out time to swing by for dinner, then sped back to his office to keep burning midnight oil. The more nights we shared, the clearer it became. I wasn't indifferent to Chase. In fact, when I replayed the day in middle school he'd teased me to tears, I realized the reason I'd crumpled so easily was that I'd liked him even then, and it hurt that my tormentor was the boy I adored. Probably why, years later, when friends asked what I wanted in a future boyfriend, I rattled off traits that described anything but juvenile Chase. Once he learned the truth, he went into a spiral, haunted by nightmares in which I married someone else while he wept in the crowd. I laughed at his fragile psyche, and marveled that fate had scripted every twist. Thanks for listening to today's story. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. See you next time.